Participation in women's football has grown by a third in the last 10 years. Current initiatives from FIFA aim to increase the number of female players from approximately 13.3 million in 2019 to 60 million in 2026. Alongside this, UEFA has tripled its financial support for the women's game. The women's game has made large transitions from amateur to professional in recent times. However, there is still a lack of scientific evidence to help inform practice. This is problematic given the ever-increasing numbers of females participating in the game and the ever-growing professionalism of the women's game. This paper, which was published in 2021, is an excellent review of current research available within the women's game and is authored by some excellent practitioners with first-hand experience of working at the elite end of women's football. Therefore, the aim of this review paper is to discuss and address some pertinent topics and make recommendations for the women's game based on the current available literature. The authors suggest 6 key areas of which the focus of this paper will cover. These areas are physical demands of match play, talent identification, anthropometric and physical characteristics, injury risk and prevention, and health and nutrition. It's clearly set out by the authors at the start that by exploring these areas, it will help identify outstanding research questions and will assist practitioners in optimising health and performance within the women's game. Being able to execute the technical and tactical demands with the coordination of movement will probably influence the physical demands of the game. Previously though, some research within the women's game has investigated the volume, as in total distance, the intensity and subsequently the activity profiles of female players. The authors are quite quick to point out that while the total match volume for females is approximately 10 kilometres, there is some variation within this metric. While this does give an indicator of the global movement activity of the players, the authors suggest that intensity in how this metric is accumulated may be of greater importance. Therefore, as the authors note, the amount of activity completed at high or maximal running speeds are key performance indicators and may actually be related to the team's success. However, due to the ambiguity in intensifying high-intensity actions, there is a lack of consensus on these metrics. For example, researchers or applied practitioners may use different speed thresholds to determine high-speed running, leading to difficulty in comparing data and generating a consensus. This may also be accompanied by different methodological approaches and technology types whilst collecting data, and this can further contribute to this ambiguity within the literature. Despite these issues though, the authors note that high-intensity running and sprinting are key components of match performance, and they go on to suggest that these should influence the type of exercises that are used within their training programs to adequately prepare players for the ever-increasing physical demand of the women's game. There is, of course, a high metabolic cost to the frequent high-intensity actions that are performed by players, and this has led to interest in repeated sprint ability. The authors of this paper are keen to note that the commonly used average requirements of repeated sprint ability for match performance may not actually demonstrate the worst case scenario for players. This is an important point as there are many contextual factors that can influence match physical demands or match physical performance, such as playing position, environment, opponent quality, the surface and the level of playing. Therefore, the authors of this paper suggest more research is required to begin to contextualise the activity profiles, especially within the elite women's game. For example, when considering the physical demands, the authors call for more research to help understand the consequences of changing locomotor patterns and the impact of specific technical actions on the physical demands within the women's game. Moving on to talent identification, the authors note that there is a paucity of literature in this area in elite female youth football players. The authors suggest that as talent development is a non-linear dynamic construct, there's little to determine future success, if at all, in adult female soccer. A good point made by the authors is that the use of closed skill-based metrics in talent ID, and they raise concern at how these actually lack specificity from a football perspective. The authors then follow this up with the suggestion that the exploration of contextual methods, such as small-sided games, in the evaluation of talent ID would be useful, alongside constructs that investigate psychological traits such as resilience and perseverance within this process. From an anthropometric and physical perspective, there is some data referring to these characteristics in elite female soccer players. However, there is a large range within this data which makes norms difficult, and this reiterates the heterogeneity within elite female players. Therefore, specific targets from an anthropometric and body composition perspective are currently unjustified. This then leads the authors to suggest that there is some scope for further research in the women's game as to whether certain playing positions require different anthropometric characteristics. Body composition assessment within the elite female game may be problematic if there is an overemphasis on this area. Indeed, the authors point us towards interviews where female players feel over-tested in this area, and this has led to suggestions that this was influenced eating habits such as carbohydrate avoidance due to excessive body composition testing. Subsequently, this leads the authors to make various suggestions within this area. These include the creation of healthy practices surrounding body composition and the development of a professional body composition framework for organisations so that staff can understand this and help establish clear guidelines on body composition assessment. This in turn will help support the players and their overall goals for well-being, performance and health. Understanding the epidemiology of injury incidents and the burden of injury is a good starting point for practitioners looking to implement a successful injury management strategy with female football players. For example, it's suggested that common injuries tend to be traumatic or non-contact by nature, with the lower extremities appearing to be the most commonly injured sites. Interestingly though, female footballers tend to have a greater number of severe injuries and with a time loss greater than 28 days in comparison to their male counterparts. Further analysis also reveals that players outside FIFA's top 15 leagues appear to have significantly higher injury incidences. While risk factors for injury can be classified as intrinsic or extrinsic, it's important to identify these factors before establishing prevention strategies. And although previous injury history may be an important risk factor for future injuries, there are some modifiable risk factors that should be identified to help reduce their impact. The authors of this paper make some suggestions for injury prevention programs for female players. One key point made here is that while adherence to injury prevention programs can be a challenge, the actual role of the coach or the head coach in promoting injury prevention has correlated with higher compliance and lower injury risk. It has been proposed hypothetically that variations in the menstrual cycle could have an influence on football performance via the direct effects of hormones on physiological function, or the side effects of the menstrual cycle such as cramping and nausea. While research in this area is gaining more ground, so to speak, the authors raised some important questions about the quality of studies and the large variations within this research area. As there are large individual differences in symptoms of the menstrual cycle, the authors suggest it may be too early to provide evidence-based general guidelines regarding the influence of the menstrual cycle on performance. However, the authors do continue that it may be worthwhile for practitioners and players to track the menstrual cycle, any symptoms that may arise, and any changes in performance due to the cycle and its phases. And this may aid the consideration of any cycle management strategies that are looking to be implemented by a player or practitioner. It's previously been suggested that female football players may be 2 to 6 times more likely to suffer an ACL injury. And some further research has also suggested that ACL injuries may occur prior to ovulation. However, the authors of this paper do suggest that this research is incredibly limited and the study quality is poor, which makes it difficult to give any practical or meaningful advice on the menstrual cycle and injury risk at this present time. The authors then go on to suggest that while not all studies have demonstrated differences in the training response to the menstrual cycle, phase-based training is a promising area to maximise training responses. However, there are quite a few logistical challenges for this, especially in a team sport, and further research is required in this area. With current research suggesting that approximately half of all elite female athletes currently use hormonal contraceptives, with oral being the most commonly used, there is little to say that users and non-users have any differences in training responses or muscle strength when using oral contraceptives. However, again, further research is still required in this area to see if there are any performance benefits, if at all, in this area. As with the menstrual cycle, the reported symptoms from oral contraceptive use are also highly individual, which suggests that working on a case-to-case basis with players may actually be a better option. The authors then go on to discuss energy availability and nutritional strategies for female football players. Energy availability is the amount of dietary energy available for normal physiological function after accounting for the energy expended in exercise and is expressed in proportion to lean body mass. Low energy availability has been associated with negative performance and health benefits such as menstrual dysfunction and an increased injury risk. And the authors then suggest that while the opportunity to negate low energy availability on heavy training days and match days should be maximised, it should also be considered during other time points and not neglected. Preventing low energy availability is of great importance for the overall health and well-being for the female player. Therefore, the authors recommend practitioners educate players on the consequences of low energy availability. Currently, there's really very little sports nutrition research in female players, and the authors make various suggestions such as dietary patterns and ergogenic aids for future research within female players. Throughout this paper, the authors rightfully identify clear gaps in research within the rapidly growing professional women's game. Therefore, the key theme throughout this excellent paper is to help inform those working within the professional women's game and to summarise any evidence-based practices that may establish better sports science support. This paper is, I would say, is a must-read for sports science staff and medicine staff, and it makes an excellent contribution to the continued professionalisation of the women's game.